Tim Burkhead with MajorLeagueFishing.com, sitting alongside former Bass Angler of the Year and Major League Fisherman, Mr. Brent Chapman. Brent, good to have you. Let's talk about flipping and pitching. That's kind of your deal. If you had to win Angler of the Year again, and it came down to the last hour, or you had to win a Classic, or heck, if you had to win a Major League Fishing event, you had one technique. That's probably it, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, you know, obviously to win Angler of the Year, you have to be very versatile, and I really strive to be versatile. But my go-to is when I go to a mystery lake, when I've never been there. I mean, I've always got a flipping stick rigged up, you know, a 20 or 25 pound line and some kind of flipping bait to get out there and pick apart the cover for sure.
You know, unlike a lot of the guys that are here at this first ever Major League Fishing Select, you actually have experience with Major League Fishing. You were an alternate in the Istapoga tournament. I was visiting with you earlier, and we were talking about my most enduring image of that tournament was as one of those last outer bands of Hurricane Sandy rotated across Istapoga. You had that boat buried up in the reeds, and you were on your knees flipping and pitching.
Yep.
And trying to get that last bite that you needed. Talk to me about the tackle that you use. You mentioned you use a flipping stick. How long, and what kind of reel and what kind of line do you put on?
Yeah, that was one of the toughest events ever. But it came down to me. The success I had there was flipping and pitching, and it's really critical when you get on the water and want to become a flipper pitcher type of fisherman. Rod and reel selection, line is very, very key to that. You know, you can't just pick up a 6.5 foot rod and expect to do that. A long rod is really key, at least a 7 foot. I predominantly throw a 7.5 foot rod, even an 8 foot rod, because the longer the rod, the more of a pendulum you get motion in the line. So pitching it, you can pitch it out there farther, easier, and same with flipping, you can flip it that much farther with that longer rod. So that's a key. The rods are heavy because typically you're in tight, heavy cover. You've got to horse those fish out. A high-speed reel, a 7-to-1 gear ratio reel. You don't want a slow gear ratio reel because if you pitch it in there and a fish bites it real quick and you got to reel down really quick to get to it, a slower reel, it's going to take you time. Or if you're pitching it out and you're reeling in. So obviously with a slower gear ratio reel, you're not going to make as many pitches. And then last but not least, the line. I'm a fluorocarbon line guy. I mean, that's what I predominantly use. Anywhere from 16-pound fluorocarbon up to 30, and then if I get into really matted vegetation or super thick like buckbrush or something like that, I'll even go to like a 65 or so pound braided line as well. So those are definitely the big keys.
Now, you know, growing up, watching guys like Denny Brower and others, Denny maybe the undisputed all-time king of flipping and pitching. One of the great privileges I've had in my life was to watch him at Chautauqua put on a clinic. But when I think of flipping and pitching historically, I used to think of pig and jig combinations. That's really changed over the years, and now most people, I think, when they talk about flipping and pitching, they're talking about creature bait, soft plastics that have a tungsten weight on top.
Yeah, it really has. I that's where I learned. I tried to emulate Denny Brower because him and I came from the same part of the country, fished a lot of the same waters, so I knew how he learned, and I tried to learn that same way as well. But yeah, when I first learned, it was the pig and jig, pig and pork and all that. Now flipping and pitching has evolved so much. There's tubes, there's beaver baits, there's creature baits. There's such a variety. So being really good at flipping and pitching, you've got to be proficient with all those different types of baits, knowing when to throw a jig over a creature bait or a beaver over a tube, so all that's really a big key.
Let's talk about that. When do you throw a jig?
For me, the jig is the go-to, but to me, a jig is when you're out to get those big bites. Obviously, we all want to try to catch big fish, but just like in Major League Fishing, sometimes it's not about catching the big ones; it's about catching the numbers. So if I'm in a tournament and I've already got a good limit of fish and I want to try to tack on some serious weight, try to catch some big fish, I always want to go to a jig because it seems like the jig will catch the biggest fish. But for me, if I want to put numbers in the boat, I'm going to go to a small beaver type bait or a tube as well to put a lot of numbers in the boat.
Is there times of the year where water temperature, the phase that the fish are in is going to dictate which bait you're throwing?
Yeah, absolutely. The times of the year are definitely a big key. Obviously, the bodies of water as well. But for me, early in the year when the water's cold, big fish are usually pretty prevalent. Jigs are really a key. When you get closer to the spawn, your creature baits and your beaver baits, your soft plastics tend to play more of a key. And that is in the summertime when things get tough again, those fish really get tight. A lot of times you're flipping mats. Your little beaver baits and really compact baits become a big key as well. So baits are critical for sure.
You mentioned summertime, and when I think of flipping and pitching now, I think as much as anything about punching through big mats of surface vegetation. How do you do that? What do you do that with?
It's to me, the rods that I use. I mean, I can 7.5 foot heavy flipping stick. I can pitch a little tube with a 16th ounce weight, or I can flip a big punching 1.5 ounce tungsten sinker or a big 1.5 ounce jig on that same setup. The big difference there is I'm going to probably go to 65-pound braid. I'm going to put that big heavy weight on there. Real key to have a bobber stop on there. And then the other key is you're trying to punch through a matted vegetation. So if you're using a big bulky bait like a jig or a big creature bait, obviously it's harder for that to penetrate through that mat. So my preference there is a little 3-inch beaver bait that falls through there with that big heavy weight. And if you've never done it, it's really kind of cumbersome at first, and you're thinking, how is a fish going to bite that bait that falls so fast through there? But it falls through, and those fish will react to it a lot of times, and that's how you put those big ones in the boat.
Let's talk about the hook set. First of all, as you're punching through or flipping something else, are you ding, 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 really jiggling the flipping bait, or are you just kind of punching it through, getting it to your target, and then moving on to something else?
And that's always the big challenge, is trying to figure out how long do you soak that bait in a particular spot. When it comes to me and I'm flipping and pitching, I'm pitching it right to the sweet spot. I pitch a bait in there, I let it fall, I hop it maybe 1-2 times, just hop, hop. If they don't get it usually on that initial fall or that first hop, I'm usually pulling it out. And sometimes I probably struggle because of that, because you get into a certain time of year during the spawn possibly where a lot of times those fish, you'll pitch it in there, they might be on a bed and they might spook off for 5 seconds and then come back, but I may have already pulled it out and already moved on. But that's the deal with flipping and pitching, is learning how long to soak that bait. But I play the odds. I'm going to fish for aggressive fish. I'm going to pitch it right into their little home. And bass don't like to move and get out of the way for a little bait, so they're going to react. They're going to bite it, and you're going to put them in the boat.
When they bite it, what are you doing on the hook set to make sure you get? Because you've got a heavy bait, but you've also often got heavy cover. Line is being moved around by sticks and vegetation and other things. How do you make sure you drive the hook home?
Very, very hard hook sets. I'm not a real big guy, but it's amazing. Some of the partners I've had in the boat say I've really got a good hard hook set. And believe it or not, with bass, I didn't believe it when I first heard it, but a bass can literally, especially you get into a 4 to 5, 6 pound bass, they can clamp down on a bait so hard that even with that big heavy equipment you're using, if you don't set the hook hard enough, and we all have seen it, you'll set the hook on a fish and they come swimming out of the cover, and what do? They come up and jump and they open their mouth and the bait just comes out. That's because you didn't drive that hook home hard enough in those fish. So that's where a braided line is real key, is very low stretch, and you can really drive it home. I've literally seen it where I was losing fish left and right because those fish would come out, they'd come out of the cover, they'd come up by the boat, and they'd spit the bait back. I finally switched to 65-pound braid, and they were stuck right how you'd love for them to be, right through the top of their head. So it really opened my eyes to how strong those fish are and how hard you have to set the hook to get the job done.
2 last questions. What colors do you like on your baits? And then second, is there a particular memory you've got, maybe in your Angler of the Year run, maybe in a Major League Fishing event, just something that really stands out when you think about Brent Chapman flipping and pitching?
It's one of those things. Colors for me are very, very simple. I've traveled the country. You can't go wrong with a black, blue type of bait and then some form of green or green pumpkin. I mean, the black and blue gets stained in dirty water, the green pumpkins, and get the clear water stuff done. So very, very simple on colors. There's so many memories, that I look back on, but You know, a big one was me winning Angler of the Year. The final event of the year, we're up at Lake Oneida, and I was catching smallmouth fish, so a little bit out of my comfort zone, catch them on top waters and swim baits. But it came down to the wire. I needed a few key fish, so I went back to what I was really comfortable with. Picked up a little 3-inch beaver, picked up my flipping stick, started flipping in the heavy cover, and caught a couple key largemouth that put me over that threshold to win Angler of the Year.
Well, Brent Chapman, one of the best anglers there is on the planet these days. Angler of the Year a couple of years ago, and very good angler who is part of Major League Fishing. Looking forward to seeing what he does in the years to come with MLF. If you would like to learn more about things like flipping and pitching, or anglers and their personalities like Brent Chapman, be sure you go to MajorLeagueFishing.com.